12,000 years before Obi-Wan's lifetime, when the Galactic Republic was attempting to expand its government beyond the more traveled trade routes, the Republic established advanced military and scout bases on several remote worlds. These planets and moons were designated as ORDs, an abbreviation of Ordnance Regional Depots. Over time, the Jedi Order replaced the Republic militia, and some of the Ords evolved into weapons disposal centers and storage facilities, while others were adopted by colonists. Ord Sagat was a small, rocky planet with mostly barren terrain and a few scattered lakes. For centuries, its modest population consisted of people who stayed only until they found somewhere else to go. Some colonists sometimes lived on the outskirts of the main settlement, but most lived close to the spaceport, the energy station, or the water treatment facility that made up the main settlement. As for tourism, most travelers regarded Ord Sagat as little more than a place to rest or refuel their ships. But all that changed after prospectors recently discovered a large deposit of carbanium, a metal used in alloys such as durasteel. Overnight, Ord Sagat was transformed into a mining world. Many colonists became instantly wealthy when they sold their properties to off-world consortiums. Mammoth vehicles were delivered to excavate the carbanium, and the spaceports expanded to accommodate the refinery ships. The settlement's population increased rapidly with migrant laborers and soldiers of fortune, and a sprawl of temporary housing had sprung up for the new arrivals. Obi-Wan reviewed these details during his journey with his master through hyperspace, the time-space dimension that allowed for faster-than-light-speed travel between planets. Studying transmitted data from the Jedi Temple, Obi-Wan said, "The missing refinery ship was the Hardy Harrow from Denon, and is owned by Denon Ardu Mutual. The ship has been scheduled to pick up a shipment of carbanium 2 days ago, but when it failed to return to the Republic's space, a Denon senator notified the Council." "Any comment from the Ord Sagat spaceport?" Qui-Gon asked. "They say the Hardy Harrow never reached Ord Sagat. What about recent acts of piracy or space weather anomalies in the system? Has anything been reported?" "No, Master." A signal light flashed on the transport's console, and Obi-Wan looked at to a sensor screen. "We're coming out of hyperspace." There was a slight shudder as the transport dropped out of hyperspace and entered real space. Outside the transport's cockpit transparistile window, a rush of bright light washed away from view and was replaced by a solitary planet amidst a field of distant stars. Obi-Wan confirmed that the planet was Ord Sagat, then said, "I'll notify the spaceport that we'll be arriving in." "Easy now, Padawan," Qui-Gon interrupted. "For all we know, the spaceport authorities may have something to do with the missing refinery. Let us arrive unannounced. We'll land in one of the public hangars on the outskirts." After gaining clearance from the spaceport, they landed their transport in an open-roof hangar. Obi-Wan was sometimes relieved to learn that Ord Sagat's climate was considerably warmer than Ilum. But as they stepped down the transport's landing ramp, he realized the air was not nearly so calm. A starship maintenance droid detected them to the hangar's exit. They had almost reached the exit when 2 uniformed security guards stepped out from the shutters to block their path. Both guards had blaster rifles slung over their shoulders, and they had expressions indicating that they were prepared to use the weapons if necessary. One of the guards looked at Qui-Gon and snarled, "Either of you carrying weapons?" Qui-Gon raised his right hand slowly and made a slight sweeping gesture with his fingers, and he said, "We don't have any weapons." Both guards were unaware that Qui-Gon was using the Force to manipulate their minds. The guard who had addressed Qui-Gon nodded and said, "No, you don't have any weapons." "We're just harmless traders," Qui-Gon added. "You can let us go on our way." "Totally harmless," the guard answered. Go on then." He and his partner stepped aside, allowing the two Jedi to move through the exit. They stepped out onto a busy street filled with pedestrian traffic and lined with merchant stalls. They walked past the stalls, keeping their lightsabers concealed within their robes. As they moved along, Qui-Gon leaned close to Obi-Wan and said in a low voice, "Notice anything unusual about the locals?" Obi-Wan surveyed the area. He saw a mix of humans and aliens from various worlds, and most wore work clothes and coveralls. Some were seated at tables with food set out in the shade of a nearby hangar. All of the merchants seemed very focused on their customers. Obi-Wan shrugged. "Well," he said, "it doesn't seem much different than any other spaceport on a backwater world, except that the people around here look glummer than most." It was true. No one appeared to be very happy about being on Ord Sagat. Qui-Gon said, "There's also the fact that no one is carrying any weapons." As Obi-Wan's eyes flickered from one person to the next, he quickly confirmed his master's observation. Except for the security guards they'd left behind in the hangar, not a single being was wearing a holster or bearing weapons of any kind. "That is unusual," Obi-Wan said. Nothing in the report from the Jedi Council mentioned that blasters were prohibited. Maybe it's just the way the locals maintain peace. "Maybe," Qui-Gon said, but Obi-Wan could tell that his master was skeptical. A trio of spacers walked by, and the Jedi watched the men enter a nearby bar, one of the older-looking buildings on the block. Qui-Gon said, "I might be able to pick up some information in there. You wait outside. I'll be back in a few minutes." A few seconds later, after Qui-Gon entered the old building, Obi-Wan heard a loud crash, and it sounded from the alley right around the corner, which ran perpendicular to the main street. After a quick glance back towards the door of the bar, he walked around the corner and found himself looking at a burly basilisk. A four-armed alien wore a stained apron and held two trays in his lower hands. A clutter of empty bottles lay scattered around his wide feet. It appeared he had just accidentally dropped the bottles. Obi-Wan was about to turn back when the basilisk, grumbling to himself, stood down and began loading the bottles on the trays with his upper arms. Obi-Wan was amazed by how fast the alien's hands moved. The basilisk was reaching toward the last cup when he looked at Obi-Wan. Eyes wide with surprise, the alien said, "Ah, nuts!" Then he lowered the trays to the ground, raised all four of his meaty four-fingered hands in the air, and said, "I surrender." Confused, Obi-Wan said, "You do?" "I know better than to mess with Jedi," the basilisk said, his bristly whiskers trembling slightly. "Even youngsters like yourself." Suddenly self-conscious, Obi-Wan glanced down to make sure his lightsaber had not accidentally become exposed. Seeing that it was still concealed beneath his robes, he returned his gaze to the basilisk and said, "Who told you I was a Jedi?" Arm still raised, the basilisk chuckled. "You did, son. For one thing, you've got a Jedi apprentice's braid dangling down your shoulder. Also, maybe you don't know this, the weave of Jedi robes is pretty distinctive. The real giveaway was when you looked to your hip to make sure your lightsaber wasn't showing. Anyway, you caught Dexter Jettster fair and square." Obi-Wan was astonished by the basilisk's powers of observation. Taking a step into the alley, he kept his expression neutral as he said cautiously, "So, Dexter, you must also know why I'm here." "Gotta hand it to you," Jettster said, winking at Obi-Wan. "I knew I couldn't keep running blasters out of my bar forever. I just never mentioned Jedi would come after me." "Running blasters?" Obi-Wan was baffled by Jettster's admission. The basilisk continued, "I won't beg for mercy. I know I done wrong, but I swear it done I drew mutual, and their security goons are the real troublemakers. Bad enough they take over the local government and confiscate everyone's weapons in the name of their law, but when they go stealing land from colonists here, well, I just had to do something. You'll find all the blasters in the back room of the bar. I haven't begun distributing them to my friends yet. As he listened, Obi-Wan's nimble mind began shifting through the information, connecting details that he already knew. He said, "Where is the hardy harrow?" "Hidden in the valley about 20 kilometers north of here," Jettster said. "It's not damaged. My friends and I hear. We captured the ship shortly after it arrived in orbit and removed its transponder. We just wanted Din and Ardu to know we weren't going to leave Ord Sagat without a fight." "Did you harm the crew?" "The crew?" Jettster wrinkled his brow at this, then said, "Come on, you know as well as I do that the Harrow was a drone barge. Doesn't have a crew except for the droids that... Jettster gasped, then he narrowed his gaze at Obi-Wan. "Go on." Jettster shook his thick head. "Son of a gundark!" he said. "You got me, Jedi. You tried to hide it, but I can see it in your eyes right now. You had no idea that I was up to anything but drop bottles before I opened my big mouth. Until one moment ago, I prided myself on how well I kept secrets, but now... Help!" The cry, it sounded like a child's voice, came from outside the alley behind Obi-Wan. He turned his head fast to see 3 security guards carrying blaster rifles, and clad in the same uniform as the pair who'd stopped him and Qui-Gon at the hangar. One of the guards was gripping the collar of a young boy who looked about 9 years old. A younger child, a girl, clutched at the boy protectively. Obi-Wan shot a severe glance at Jettster and said, "Stay here!" Then he ran to the alley where the pedestrians had already formed a small crowd around the guards and the 2 children. The guard who had grabbed the boy growled, "I saw you throw that rock at me, whelp! Now you're gonna pay for it! Unhand him!" Obi-Wan said as he moved towards the guards. Keeping one hand on the boy's collar, the guard glanced at Obi-Wan and barked, "Back off, kid!" And then he shifted his blaster rifle, bringing it up towards Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan's lightsaber flashed, sweeping through the rifle's barrel. The guard released the boy, who fell back into his younger sister's arms as the shattered barrel fell and rolled across the street. The other 2 guards moved as if they were about to raise their own rifles, but then they looked beyond the blazing lightsaber to meet Obi-Wan's gaze. "A Jedi!" murmured a voice from the crowd. "He's a Jedi!" A silence fell over the street, all eyes on Obi-Wan and the guards. Obi-Wan was about to order the guards to drop their weapons, but before he could get a word out, the entire crowd broke out in an exultant cheer. Obi-Wan kept his eyes trained on the guards. As the crowd continued to cheer for the Jedi, the guards dropped their weapons. While the unarmed guards shifted nervously in the middle of the street, Obi-Wan felt a finger gently tapping at his right shoulder. He turned to see Qui-Gon standing behind him and quickly deactivated his lightsaber. Raising his voice so he could be heard over the applauding crowd, Qui-Gon said, "Should I have reminded you to stay out of trouble?" Obi-Wan retorted, "You asked me to wait outside." Remembering Dexter Jettster, he glanced back to the alley where he saw Jettster leaning against the wall outside the bar. Jettster had joined in the applause, clapping with his 2 upper hands while using his lower hands to point to the ground. Jettster had stayed where he was told. Obi-Wan thought, "He's really not a bad guy. Quite helpful, actually." Returning his gaze to his master, Obi-Wan said, "Before you issue reprimands, shall I tell you where we'll find the hardy harrow?" Qui-Gon stared at Obi-Wan for a moment, then said, "And just how did you come by this information?" "A little 4-winged bird told me."